I hope you all feel suitably chastened, a little bit down after all this. And my job is to kind of bring it back up. Because what we're actually looking to here, for the Center for Applied Cross-Cultural Research, we're actually looking to do action. I mean, as researchers, we too frequently just report the bad figures. But here we're trying to create some action. And so after I speak, we've asked four opinion leaders to speak to this issue from their own perspectives. But now I'd like to speak to it from research as well as my perspective on what this all means and what we do about it. So the first thing in terms of coping with discrimination, that in terms of the harassment, it's not nearly as bad as you think. Okay, I would say I would be verbally harassed on average about once a year. Okay, I've lived here for 16 years, so that means 16 incidents, possibly. It's probably actually even less than that if I think about it. That's actually quite easy to cope with. It's not pleasant, but it's not life-destroying, self-esteem threatening either. And the case is that Asians typically will minimize this, because the last time I was harassed in this way, I was sitting there in Nelson, and someone just walked by and screamed an epithet at me. Well, all right, it doesn't make me feel too good, but it doesn't really harm me that much at all. So if we look at the international research, this is actually water off a duck's back. So international research on control strategies find that within Asia, Japan, China, Korea, etc., Asians are very accustomed to secondary control strategies. What that means is that if they cannot change an external reality, they'll modify their own thinking and their own behavior in order to accommodate with it. And the reason is that Asians' culture itself is very structured, and you frequently encounter things that are beyond your control. So this experience of verbal harassment, while certainly is not something that should happen in New Zealand society, it isn't something that should be condoned or allowed, it's also not necessarily as damaging an experience as all that masses of data might suggest. I don't mean to downplay it, but I do mean to say that the most typical incident would be the kind of thing that I experienced, but there's certainly much worse incidents as well. So that's the first one, and in the second one, I think that there is this tendency to think, gosh, this must be a bunch of people whinging, that they're just complaining. Well, in the 2009 Race Relations Report that I actually read, that Joris presented in Nelson, the vast majority of race-related complaints to the Race Relations Conciliator were actually by Pākehā. So probably about 80% of them. So Pākehā complained the most about racism in New Zealand. These data were slightly skewed because that was the Hone Harawira statement years, but still, I don't think it's a case where this group is particularly complaining or whinging about things. Why? So again, this is large-scale survey data showing that in terms of life satisfaction, Asians rate their lives in New Zealand very good. So 84%, just behind New Zealand Europeans, and slightly higher than Maori or Pacific. So how could this be? So I've already given you some clues about it in terms of this coping strategies, but there's more. I think many Asians move to New Zealand for their children's education or for a higher quality of life. Asians often have a very long-term acculturation strategy. They're not necessarily thinking of this immediate thing, or they're not necessarily thinking, I'm going here, for the pot of gold. They report feeling less stressed in New Zealand and having more time to spend with family, and so the well-being I've already reported. And this is a quote from a migrant in Auckland. When I look back at Hong Kong and compare it with here, I have no regrets. When I go back to Hong Kong, I cannot see the air, the skyline, and the stress. Here, it's so quiet, you're able to talk. Hong Kong, no way. Always busy, busy, busy. And so I'd like to close, I guess, with maybe a slightly inspiring message in looking at coping strategies for two groups. And the first group is Kiwi Chinese. I think too often we have the stereotype that Chinese are all the Johnny-come-latelys in New Zealand, whereas in fact, some Chinese have been here for many generations since the Otago Gold Rush. And the typical identity strategy used among this group, which is strongly associated with the New Zealand Chinese Association, is that they identify themselves as Kiwi Chinese. They don't differentiate strongly from other New Zealanders. Their accents are very Kiwi. If you heard them on the phone, you'd think they were an New Zealander. It's only the face that's different. Their attachment to Kiwi Chinese identity was much more a matter of intuitive comfort than clearly articulated qualities of difference. In other words, they kind of had a sense that they were different, but if you asked them exactly what it was, they couldn't describe it very well. So this group is essentially integrative in their orientation, and they identified being a Kiwi Chinese as an asset, and that they could able to bridge communities, the Pagya community and the Chinese community. These strategies are very different for what was reported, and this is qualitative research, by the way, by myself, Anna Morgan, and Emma Wang. Very different for first-generation Chinese migrants that we interviewed in Nelson. These were first-generation immigrant women. They accepted that they were different from the mainstream. And their strategy was to maintain a core set of Chinese values while accommodating to the values of the mainstream. So in compared to this very integrative orientation, this was a separatist and maybe a private integration. And the private integration is at the level of values. What are the values? They're very, very simple values. Hard work, frugality, sacrifice for the family, rule by conscience, which is a liangxing, and I've forgotten the last one, unfortunately. See, I'm too acculturated. They could actually recite these very, very easily, whereas the Kiwi Chinese couldn't. They could see that this was very differentiated. The last one. This is the one that I have trouble with. My mom especially tells me that. Respect for elders. They have these 5. Why are they in New Zealand? Because those 5 combine with what they can have here, which is a love of freedom and a joy to do what you want to do. So let's see some quotes from these specific people here. I was going to read some Chinese to you. Now, the key thing with these interviews is these are all conducted in Mandarin. Okay, the previous interviews with Kiwi Chinese is all in English because the Kiwi Chinese typically don't speak Chinese anymore. These ones much prefer to speak Chinese. I won't give you the Chinese, but those of you who can read it can see what's going on there. I'll just do it in English. Taiwan has huge societal pressures. You have to study hard, test into a good university. After graduation, you must seriously look for work. After work, you have to prepare for marriage, blah, 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 blah. There is no step off the ladder. There is no time to take a deep breath and enjoy life. And if you take a step off, you can either fall into this circle, and it says, 那所谓有一个一圈一圈一直转一直转，如果你不够坚强的话。So if you're not strong enough, you can fall into this trap very easily. Survival in Asia is not easy. So for these ones, one of these women reported that, in fact, I'm someone who doesn't have a strong sense of self-direction. 我没有主见. And that would be a quality that would be cultivated in Asia, to go along with the system, to be able to fit with the system, to do the secondary control. These migrants are choosing not to do that, and they're adapting to their circumstances as best they can. And so this young woman said, every step I followed from my father, but what if the father chose the wrong path for her? So she stepped off of it, married a Kiwi. They run a B&B in Nelson. I'm nearly at the end now, and I want to talk about why is it that Asians keep coming to New Zealand? What is it about this country that's good and attractive, and it's all about this freedom? So I asked these women, do you have any expectations for your children? And one of the mothers said, basically not. After arriving in New Zealand, I feel as long as they're not doing things against good conscience, again, this Chinese concept of liangxing, they don't need to worry about being a farmer. Because in New Zealand, there aren't high and low occupations and occupational prejudices. In mainland China, being a farmer is a category you want to enjoy, to avoid at all costs. Whereas, of course, in New Zealand, a farmer, most of them, actually many of them are probably millionaires. And so right, they have a lot of debt as well. So they say, right, no one is more respectful of the clothes than the person here. And there's an aphorism that's in Chinese. I wish you could see it, but yeah, there it is. Everywhere you go, it's like that. Even if you're a fisherman or the like, they like this type of life. So this is the reason why. This is what pulls it all together. This is why we've asked you here to make this even better. The Asian, I think, they're not coming here expecting paradise. They want to have a fair go. And they appreciate New Zealand for what it is. So at the very end, I'd like to turn it over to our commentators. And we really want to talk about the importance of social inclusion and social cohesion. We want to ensure that migrants feel welcome, satisfied with New Zealand. That will increase self-esteem and good mental health. We really want to look at this problem of racial discrimination. We're going to ask some opinion leaders, how do we deal with this? We know it's associated with poorer health. This is documented in research all over the world. And then we know it has costs as well, because if you have very qualified migrants who don't find work and they go on to another country, it hurts all of us. So I guess what I'm issuing a call for at the close is that we work together as a community from all different perspectives to address this issue. It has always been an approach from the Human Rights Commission to do this. I think I've admired Joris ever since the response to the Jewish cemetery desecration. That was not a problem for the Jewish community, it was a problem for all New Zealanders. And please take up the call now. Thanks for your attention.